Life isn't perfect, and neither are we.
Nope. But we know how to face our fears
And have some fun.
and talk about all the messiest things of life.
Like the messiest things.
Get connected to yourself, get connected to others, and get connected to the life right in front of you.
This is The Connected Life with Justin and Abby.
That's me.
That's you.
And you. Wow. I am so excited about this episode, but already in just preparing, literally feel just tears on the edge. I'm already going to cry just thinking about the story that we're about to go into.
Yeah.
Woo! Here we go. Okay, so if you guys just tuned in, last week we had Mariah and Steve. Mariah is somebody who is, I've trained her as a life consultant. She is currently going through, this year we started the life consulting masterclass. It is live, but where we are training people to do that. She is interning in that program. Phenomenal. She's worked in all of our courses. She was a mentor in LFA this year. Got to see a lot of people's lives transformed.
I would say so, yeah.
She would call me every week and be like, this is amazing. And
voice memo after voice memo.
Yeah. So it's really fun to get to see that. So she's been involved in our lives. I've known her for about a decade. I've seen her grow up and work through so much stuff. She and her family are tenacious about growing and going after health and wholeness. And last week we had her and her dad on. We have her and her dad on again this week. Steve, welcome also.
Thank you.
And Steve's also part of our life consulting masterclass.
Yeah,
as
Steve
well
and
as
his
Kelly.
wife. Kelly, you give a shout out
Kelly's
back there.
hiding out in the background.
So it's fun because Mariah, Steve, and her mom are all in that class together. So you can have lots of conversations about all the things. But so in our last episode, they kind of shared the journey of Mariah starting to recognize that she had pain in her family and recognizing that she had lived in a lot of denial for years. And then her starting to confront her parents and her dad's journey of thinking it was dumb, and then him getting on board, and then him learning how to really meet her where she was at, and then the beauty of the redemption that has happened for them. So I thought we'd just start this episode on a great, exciting note, which is why don't you share, Mariah, a couple of the ways that you've seen your dad change in the last decade?
Well, my dad has softened a lot in the last decade, and he feels really tender to people. And when he went from somebody that could be fairly judgmental to somebody who feels like he gives people the benefit of the doubt a lot, which I really enjoy. He still cusses and swears when we watch the Seahawks play, as he should. So he's working on some things. But there was always like this fear for me that my dad was just going to like switch and go, like last episode we talked from like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, like wonderful dad to like super scary. And the last decade I've seen my dad be really steady, and his like, I mean, we all get triggered and what, but those like intense moments are not nearly as intense, and there's tons of ownership. Like I have my dad come to me and apologize or take ownership and like not blame, not like push off why he reacted, but like, hey, that was on me and I'm really sorry. That would have been really scary. So yeah, that's been so fun as a daughter to have your dad grow into the man you always knew he could be.
No pressure, right?
Steve's like, and now I'm having one of those moments where I will have to be perfect the rest of my life. No. Steve, what are some of the ways that you've seen Mariah respond as you've grown?
Well, she's become more honest. Last week we found out that she misled us in her fourth year of internship. Second year. No, she's been. I just find that our communication has been so much more honest and real and authentic. There's less. I don't know what I'd call it, but when we have conversations, now I know that they're really truly from the heart. There's not, one of the things that I was just thinking about is, as she was saying that, I've been more steady. It's easy to do that when you've given yourself permission to have compassion on yourself and to love yourself and to not have to constantly defend your actions and your words and your attitudes, and just to be able to be real with yourself. And I know that I love I know that there's a love there for, that goes all the way back. And so I'm not constantly protecting, my heart from pain. I can be real and know that it's going to be okay. And so that's really, I think that's really changed the way that we communicate in ways that it's actually, you can probably tell I'm struggling to put words to it, but it just, the way that we communicate now just seems, like I said earlier, just seems more authentic and more real. We have real conversations, not just superfluous.
Totally.
We have those too.
Totally. The fun ones.
Yeah. But when we need to, I guess we have permission with each other to be real and honest. And I just see the ways that we talk, and she has a lot more compassion. I think I had to get to a place before she was able to allow herself to go back to a place where she felt like she had to live Now she gets to live in those places, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, one thing that's been great is, as I've been married for 4 years now, and as I have walked through things in my marriage that I get triggered because of the things that my dad did, I can go to my dad and be like, I'm in pain. My husband's doing a very small thing and I'm having a very large reaction because of what you taught me. Not in a pointing the finger way, but like in a, I need you to love me here and like help me heal. That's been so cool. And I very much recognize that that's a gift and that not everybody has that. Yeah. And that some people have been on the healing journey and have tried to invite their parents into that place and they're not there yet. So I feel really blessed by that.
It's been really fun to actually be the dad that I didn't even know could be.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But to be the dad that comes, and for Kelly to be the mom, to be the parents that, are able to be there and comfort Mariah rather than the other way around. Yeah. I mean, that's the way that it's supposed to be, the way that it should have been, the way that I wish it would have been with mine.
Yeah.
It's like I'm able to now be that parent that I wish I would have had.
Yes.
That's really beautiful.
Well, and it's I was thinking this in the last episode, thinking about how you felt like you needed to be, I'm trying to remember what it was. You guys literally used the same wording in both of your like both of you were like, I'll be the good. Now I can't remember. My brain just like poof, it lost. But I was thinking last time, there's such generational things that you can see that you both did similar pathways of coping skills. And so to see you, Steve, get to step in to be a part of her breaking the cycle is just so profound. And I think this is what people need to know is once you break the barrier, it's really hard to take ownership the first few times. But then it gets easier where you like kind of get in a habit where you're like, okay, I can listen to her share and I know that my love and just being with her actually is all she needs. And it gets easier to be able to do it. The first few times feel like you're going to die and it feels so hard, but then it gets easier and easier. And then you're getting to be a hero in the family. And I think that's what people don't understand is they think the hero is the person who was good all along. Not the hero is somebody who takes ownership for being human for the rest of their lives. Because I'm going to if I had kids right now, I'd be screwing them up right and left.
Yeah, we would.
Yeah. So it's not about, am I doing everything right? I try to get this through to parents so often. They want to do everything perfect and they want to do everything correct so that there's no pain ever. And if people would let that go and be like, oh, if I'm actually just good at taking ownership and loving and being with my kid, we're gonna be just fine.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, depending on which child you talk to on which day, that hero moniker may or may not be applicable.
I'm
I'm
sure that's
still
very
managing
true.
to screw up you know, some,
Well, I think that's
some kits.
we're ever learning,
Yeah,
right? Like,
absolutely.
I think I know something about love, and then 4 years later, I'm like, oh, I was still doing this crazy thing, even though I thought I was loving you.
The difference today is I now understand and know the pathway to freedom. That wasn't a plug, but it's the truth. Like, I now know that pathway. Like, I know that there is a pathway, which is part of the thing. Like, I know there is something. And I know that when I do mess up, I know how to path back to wholeness, and going back and correcting things and making it right. Reparenting.
Yeah.
And you'll hear that in this story is like nobody did everything right. Like we, in the middle of our like greatest pain, we reverted back to some of our old patterns because that's what you do when you're in trauma.
Yeah.
So it's not that like, oh, we walked through after our wholeness journey, like we could manage anything perfectly. No. Like that's not the goal, but the goal is how do you clean it up?
Yep.
Yeah. And like, do you have to shame yourself when you make a mistake, even though you know like what to do? Like, I think that was one thing I learned. I was trying my best to
be perfect.
Well, in the middle of it, I was trying my best to manage as healthily as possible. But I was like, I remember you coming and visiting me in the middle of this story and being like, how are you doing in here? And I'm like, I think I'm probably shutting down and disassociating. And I just don't know. And I know that I'm going to have to probably clean that up with my own self after I'm out of a really intense trauma.
Totally.
Yeah.
So let's jump into, I just want to tell you, listeners, we're not going to go deep into the actual traumatic stuff, but we do want to share this story because I think it's going to be really special and healing to so many people.
To give you guys a 30,000 foot view of the situation, about 2.5 years ago.
Oh, I thought we'd have him start by reading his letter.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah. Steve, why don't you
start there?
Start and open that up.
So Steve wrote this letter of impact that he read in court. And so we're just going to take small snippets from it and then talk about.
Yeah. So our daughter's attacker, which you'll learn later, the story, was sentenced about a week or so ago. And during the sentencing, they asked if we wanted to provide a victim impact statement. And so I did. And when I started writing the impact statement, I had a mindset, if you will. And in the process of writing the impact statement, a whole lot of things changed. And by the time I got to the end of the impact statement, it didn't really look anything like what I had in mind. So I'll share the first part with you. So I read to the judge, and by the way, her attacker was in court listening to this as well. 25 years ago, almost to the day, a sweet 5-year-old boy and his rambunctious, nearly 4-year-old redheaded sister came into our lives through adoption. They joined our 4-year-old biological daughter, who is Mariah. Their half-sister would round out the troop a few years later. Kimberly was equally a challenge and a delight. She was the stereotypical stubborn redhead and came with a troubled past, which contributed to the challenge part. She was a delight in that her beautiful smile could change a room, as could her amazingly beautiful voice. As she developed as a singer and later a music artist, playing the guitar and writing music, she would often be asked to perform, for example, the national anthem, as well as other venues. While pursuing her passion for music, Kimmy was able to pursue another passion through her work. As an adult, Kim had developed an appreciation, through her own personal early childhood experience, for the importance of support and connection. She left a job working with abused and battered women at a shelter to move to Reading to pursue an education and also to begin working at a treatment center. We'll never forget her excitement when she called to tell us that she just landed a dream job working with disadvantaged youth and how she hoped drawing from her own personal journey would give them hope and encouragement. What she wanted was for these kids to feel loved, honored, accepted, and known. She quickly fell in love with them, and she wanted to send the message that even if they didn't get the chance that she was given, there was always hope and that you could always decide to turn your life around through consistent, good decisions and learning to love yourself. As Kimmy's parents, we are very proud of her, and we marvel at how she could overcome so much adversity as a child and maintain such a positive outlook on life. She was always the one who would get knocked down and get right back up again, stronger than before and with more resolve. Little did we know that resolve would be tested like never before.
I just thought it was a beautiful picture of what she was like growing up.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about then what happened that kind of...
Well, yeah, I got it was about 2.5 years ago. I can't remember who notified me.
Mariah.
I think it was Mariah.
Yeah, reached out to me and let me know that your sister had been hurt really bad. Do you remember any of that?
Yeah, I was getting ready to go to work that morning, and my mom called me and was like, Mariah, Kimberly was found unconscious, and some other details, and she's being rushed to the hospital. They put her in a coma, and we don't know like what's going on or what happened exactly, but she's really hurt. And I just like spun out, and so we were living in LA at the time, and so Redding's like 8 hours away. So I thought she was going to wake up. Like I thought, oh, she's going to be in a coma for like 5 hours, and then they're going to wean her off of it, because I guess she was really combative when she came in. So I called Justin and I was like, can you please go to the hospital, because I can't imagine her waking up and not having anybody there, knowing that she had just been super abused. Like, I need somebody that knows her. And Justin has worked with Kimberly. So that was. Yeah.
So, the 30,000 foot view of what had happened to her is that she was physically, violently assaulted and sexually assaulted by one of the young men inside of the treatment facility.
The group home, yeah.
The group home. And I happily, because I love your family and love Kim, chose to go over there, and I was the first visitor on the scene to see her. And I think that to this day, the image that I saw, like what I experienced there, like it's still just written inside of my head. Like I can't undo the picture of the bloody mess that I saw. And I'll leave it at that as far as the intensity of the experience. And I just remember sitting by her side, and I just started telling her, Kimmy, I love you. I'm with you. It's Justin. You're going to make it through this. You're going to be okay. And I just grabbed her hand and just held it as she laid on the table there, unconscious, in the coma that they had induced. And I remember watching. It was very interesting watching the nurses inside of that room. There was both a combination of dissociation that they were engaging in and utter meltdown. Mm-hmm. Like I actually watched the eyes of the nurses, female and actually the male doctor. Like I could see them breaking behind their eyes at the moment. And it was very interesting it felt very surreal to be part of that. And at the moment, like all I knew is like, I don't have anything to give but my love and my presence. And so I just stayed there with her, and I kept praying over her and declaring that she would live and that she would have her life back. And the type of brutality that I saw would say different, that might not be the chance for her. So I guess I may pass it off to.
Yeah. Well, I was able to make it up first after I literally threw everything I could in a suitcase in about 5 minutes and grabbed my husband, and we drove up there, and I had no idea what was waiting for me. And the nurse led me into the room in the ICU, and I remember thinking like, this is the wrong room. That's not my sister. And the only thing that clued me in that it was her red hair. Mm. But she was unrecognizable in every way. And like swollen, double her size. It was the most horrific thing that I've ever seen. I couldn't really look at her. Like it's like one of those things you want to know, but since it was my sister, it just was so painful. And my parents were driving down from Washington, and they asked me to send them a picture of her so that they could be prepared. And I sent a picture and sent it to my dad, which I think my mom was driving at the time. And you can say what that was like for you. Yeah,
we had about a 9-hour drive. And I had asked Mariah to send me a photo, because I didn't want to be unprepared for what we were going to be walking into. And I wanted to just, I guess, thought maybe that would prepare me, but literally nothing could have prepared me for that picture. I just Kelly tells me that I groaned. I went into this travail and just, I don't even really remember, but I guess 30, 40 minutes just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And I honestly, it was I shake right now just thinking about it, but I don't even really remember too much about it, but it was literally the most horrific thing that I'd ever seen. And it was my daughter. I mean, that was the part that I couldn't wrap my mind around, that here she was laying there. And anyway, we ended up, getting down there and going in, and by that time they'd moved her from the ER into ICU, and she was in a coma, and so we talked to the doctor. They were trying to get some swelling down. She had a major contusion that they were trying to manage, and there's just a lot going on, and but all the time I think, in our minds we were like, well, they put her into a coma, so as soon as she comes out of the coma,
right,
we'll be able to see her again and talk to her and
find out what happened.
Yeah, find out what happened. And we felt like at the time I was thinking of all the people, of all the kids, like that this would happen to. It happened to had to happen to the kid that also got abused, at 2 and 3 years old in the same manner. And I thought, I was just a lot of emotions,
Totally.
Shock, sadness, anger, a lot of anger.
Totally.
That's where a lot of violent anger comes in.
Yeah. But just, really just stunned, I guess, kind of just like Mariah mentioned, just kind of, I guess maybe had to disassociate to some extent. And
there's no way that anybody, I had to dissociate, and I wasn't that close to her in the hospital. I think that you just have, in trauma in general, we all have to dissociate a little bit to survive through it.
Yeah.
And we can only feel what we can feel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was just kind of, like kind of getting a game plan, like getting into like that mode of, okay, what do we have to do here?
Yeah. What's the practical?
What are we going to do? We got to, what does she need?
Yep.
How are we going to make sure she gets the best care? But all the time our mindset was, as soon as they wean her off the medication, she'll be doing great.
Yeah.
Like not great, but but relatively speaking, certainly greater than what had actually ended up happening. And so I don't know if you want me to go into that this time. So, well, I think a couple days had gone by, maybe 3 or 4 days, and Mariah and Daniel had gone back home to LA because he had to work. So it was me and Mariah and Kelly, and we, were there pretty much around the clock. They put us up at this little place next door, and
exhaustively.
And so we have, some friends in Redding that were out of town and said, hey, if you guys need just a place to go hang out for a little bit and get a break, come on down. So we decided to do shifts. And so I stayed, and Ryan and Kelly went down and stayed at our friend's place for a little bit, just a few hours. And anyway, it was about 11 o'clock at night, and while everything was kind of dark in the room, and I was just sitting there with Kim, she still was, very much in a coma. At that point, I believe they had started to wean her off the medication, and they were like, it's a sedative that they put them in a coma with. So, and then pain medication. She was on a lot of pain meds. So they'd started to pull her off of the sedation medication, and then also some of the pain meds because she wasn't responding. And they had pretty much, I believe at that point, taken her off of everything. And we're just like, we're not sure why she's not responding, but she's actually in a real coma. Like it's not an induced coma anymore.
Fake coma to real coma.
Induced coma. And then like she's in a coma all on her own, and she was starting to get some cranial pressure, that was causing some issues, and just a lot of stuff going on. And it was just overwhelming. So that night, the doctor came in about 11 o'clock. He was making his final rounds of the day. And he said, hey, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to talk to you. Is your family, your wife here? And I said, well, no, they took off for a little bit. And I said, but go ahead. You can talk to me. I can relay it. And he goes, well, I did it. I've been looking at the films. They did an MRI, and he goes, she has significant damage. And he was very careful in his choice of words, but he was like, she has significant damage. And I hadn't seen the film at the time. I saw it later, but apparently on one whole side of her brain, the film showed that, it was just a bunch of dead brain cells.
Wow.
And then the part that connects the left and right hemisphere, the corpus callosum or whatever it's called, that was all damaged. That had a bunch of dead brain cells. And then also the frontal lobe, the cognitive portion of the brain, big spot up there that was all, white, dead brain cells.
Wow.
And he goes, this is pretty significant. He goes, actually really significant. And he said, I just want to prepare you because I don't know, he looks at her and then he looks at me and he goes, this could actually be all we get.
The coma.
Meaning the coma. Like,
wow.
She might not come out of it.
Wow.
And he goes, I just want you to be prepared for that emotionally. And I mean, again, we're thinking, when's she coming out of the coma? You're
Totally.
lowering the drugs and, she should be, coming out at any time now. And
yeah.
we can tell her we're here and, those things. But it seemed that it wasn't to be. So.
And I remember feeling the weight of that because you and I had talked, and I just felt like this blow of like, oh geez, like this is even worse than it's already bad enough. But now this information.
Literally, the only thing I think that could have been worse is if she would have just flatlined.
Yeah.
Like it felt like she was a step away, and so the whole uncertainty, and but I'm a man of faith. We're a family of faith, and we believe in miracles, and we believe that God can heal. And so I just remember looking at him. He wore a cross, and I didn't know if he was a believer or not. But I looked at him, and I just looked him in the eye actually, and I said, "Doc," I said, "Are you a dad? Are you a father?" And he just didn't say anything. Like I think he was surprised that it was going to. Like that was my response out of all things. And then pretty soon he kind of nodded, and I could see him kind of tearing up, and he goes, "Yeah, I am." And I said, "Well, then I hope you appreciate what I have to say to you." And that is that, yes, her dad, like, I can't, I know you're an amazing, I'm sure you're an amazing neurosurgeon. I know you've been doing this many, many years. You've probably seen hundreds, maybe thousands of these kind of cases. But I can't believe your report because that's just not what I believe. And I have to believe that Kim is going to be healed, that God is going to heal her. And he just kind of
nodded,
pitifully shook his head. And well, you need to do what you need to do. And
totally,
I appreciate that. And, I mean, I didn't get any backup.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
It was just like, okay. And I remember the nurse, she was holding on to me the whole time.
She was.
Yeah, she was so sweet. And she was just there by my side. And he said, "Well, do you have any more questions?" And I said, "No." And so she's like, "Can I get you anything?" They always want to give you water. I don't know what the deal is with water, but it's like,
that's all they got.
"Can I get you some
That
water?"
is all they have.
There's like nothing
Jell-O.
else
I'll give you
exciting.
crappy Jell-O.
Yeah.
At that point, 5 years sober, I'm like, "Do you have any vodka?" No, I didn't. No, I didn't. It did. It was stunning, and I just remember, she goes, "Do you need anything?" I said, "No, I just need to be alone, for a little bit if you don't mind." And she said, "Yeah, no problem." So she went out of the room. So it was me and Kim, and immediately I went up and she had a good, we called it the good side and the bad side. I went to her good side, and I just leaned down and whispered in her ear because I didn't know what she was picking up. I didn't know what she heard.
Hearing,
I didn't know,
Yeah.
And I just encouraged her. I said, "Baby, we are not believing that report. We are believing that God is going to heal you." And, and I just kept speaking affirmation over her, and I prayed with her. And
I will say, I'll jump in here because I was there a couple times during she was off the medication. She was in the real coma part. And it was something that you guys all did really well was you all talked to her the whole time.
Yeah.
You guys were like super tuned in with her and talking to her so kindly and like you can hear this and telling her that you loved her and what you loved about her and I thought that was a very beautiful part of something horrific.
Well, I think too along that line, Kim is, because of all the abuse that she went through before she was adopted, she had a lot of really intense behavioral problems, especially as a young kid. So there's this like love frustration relationship, and we've all talked about it and like worked through it all, but there's like this super stubborn, also really wounded part of Kim that was often sometimes hard to have relationship with.
Yeah.
So it was this kind of really sweet experience because we like deeply, deeply love her. But to have her there in a coma, like none of her protection is up.
Right.
Like all the protection that we've been bumping up against that is hurt, like painful and hard, it's all down. So it was like
You
this
could really feel like the sweetness of her spirit.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it was like so like I've never loved her more. Like
Yeah,
I've
same.
never I didn't feel any of the like, oh, you're on my last nerve that I have as an older sister. Like it was all gone. And I don't think that was just because, oh, I really want you to live.
Yeah.
It was also because all of her protections are down. And what we were getting was authentic Kim. And we were like getting that like, it felt like this almost like tapping into what the Lord has always said over her life is that you will live and you're going to prosper. And like, you were here for a reason and you're here not just to like get abused and have a crazy life story, but to like actually be a voice of redemption, that you can literally experience the worst thing a human can experience and then have redemption. And it felt like we felt like when anyone would say anything about her, like a doctor or nurse come in, we'd be like, no, like that has to like not, I wasn't trying to be like one of those crazy faith people, even though I love them, but like we were living in the reality and also living in, but like our spirits really felt like that actually isn't what you're like, that's not what we're saying over Kim. And there was this whole,
I do want to just mention for people listening, there wasn't denial because I was there. There was a realistic, like, we don't know what will happen. We are fighting for her life.
Yeah.
But we're not living in denial, using faith as denial.
Yeah.
There was hope for her, and like, no, we want her to hear there's hope for her. Because I want to differentiate, because I've been in situations where it's like you can't speak anything negative, and it feels more like a religious rule-based control because everything feels like chaos, and that's not what I experienced. It felt more of like we want to make sure that she's hearing that she's loved, that she's wanted, and there's hope for her.
Because it
we
felt
want
way
that
more
to be the story.
Yes, it felt like an emotional battle that we were experiencing. Like when you know Kim's story and you know the abuse that she's experienced, this felt like you're just trying to confirm all of those things that she's been believing about herself.
Right.
And it was the first time I think we all felt as a family like, no, we're not letting that happen. Like, no, actually, we're not saying that you're defeated or rejected or unwanted. Like, you will leave this bed knowing that you are wanted and that you belong and that we want you.
I was gonna say, yeah, even on that note, I remember I had some time quietly with her one night when I came to visit, and I was just sitting there telling her, it is safe to be here. Like, your story has told you that it's not safe. But it's actually safe to be here, that there's purpose inside of this, that you don't have to run away from this, that though this experience is painful, that's not the mark of your life. Your life is not meant to be a story of, it's just pain. And I kept telling her that. I'm like, so you can come back. You are loved. There's more than just surviving this. There's thriving available on the other side of this situation. And I watched you guys do that so well. I watched Kelly do that so well.
So
You're
motherly.
just so mothering, so fighting for her so many times that I
She's
saw
such
you.
a great job.
Yeah, so tender, so compassionate. And I think that was something that we all saw for you. What did you experience towards her, Steve?
Well, Mariah kind of brought it up. I mean, Kim and I, it's no secret that we have butted heads for years. We had a pretty contentious relationship, and a lot of my frustration and everything, was directed toward her a lot of the time. And she, walking through her process, I mean, it was a disruption to life as we knew it. And I had, I had to be honest that I had resentment about that. And I had resentment toward her, and, we've discussed it and talked, worked through that. But I mean, it's like, it was a reality.
Right.
And to see her helpless and to see her vulnerable and to see her in that condition, like, I mean, honestly, it literally broke something in me that I didn't even really probably fully realize was there. But it literally broke something in me. And my heart toward Kimberly has been so much different. I mean, I'm not going to say we still have our moments.
Absolutely.
But my heart toward Kimberly has radically changed. And Abby, I want to talk briefly about something that you may or may not even remember, but I remember like it was yesterday, and Mariah said, Abby told us, to look for the beauty inside of tragedy. And I was like, that seems kind of like a weird statement, but okay. And yet, as we walked through the process that as we talk about this, we saw a lot of beauty. There was a lot of things that happened. And I hope we get a chance to talk about that. But there was a lot of beauty inside this tragedy. A lot of things that, I look back and think, would we be where we are today had this not happened? That the scripture about, the Lord turning all things to good to, those that diligently seek him, or whatever that is. But, like we literally saw the hand of God turn a horrible thing, into something that we would never have experienced. That was actually, it turned out to be beautiful.
Yeah.
If you can imagine that.
And it's an interesting thing. It's hard to talk about trauma in a balanced way. To be like, it's still very horrible. But there's also still beauty inside of it. And that's what I think about, Paul Young always says that about the cross, that one of the reasons Jesus died on the cross was he looked at the most horrible things a human would do to another human and said, I'll crawl inside of that and make the cross a symbol of redemption instead of a symbol of the horrible thing that it is. And that's what Jesus does, is that he comes into the most horrible things that we go through and figures out how to bring beauty in the midst of that. But in no way does the beauty make it worth it. And I want to be careful, even like you had said, like there's purpose for your life, and not that there's purpose for what happened.
Right.
Because I think a lot of Christians make up a lot of things to try to feel better about pain. Like there's a reason why God had me go through this. And there's no reason that Kim went through that besides living in a fallen planet with sinful, hurting humans.
Right.
But God is so good. And I think you guys have done a phenomenal job of celebrating and enjoying the beauty in the midst of grieving and acknowledging the horror.
Something you told me actually about my relationship with my dad that I took into this was that God could have got us where we are now without that.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I want to make sense of why I went through so much pain and why my parents went through so much pain. And like, God didn't need tragedy to bring us to healing. Yeah. But God will use tragedy to bring us to healing.
Yeah.
And that is a very big distinction.
Yeah. I love that.
Well, and I just remember sitting there, after the doctor and the nurse left, and, and praying with Kim and thinking, we're going to believe for a miracle. That's what we do. Right. And then all of a sudden, like having these thoughts of doubt, like this fear, like, well, wait a minute. What if she doesn't come out of it? Like, what if she is in a coma? What if she's a vegetable? What if she dies?
Yeah.
What if I lose her? Like, I'll never be able to tell her, I'm sorry for all those things. I'm sorry for the things that we, that we argued about, that, the terrible things I've said to you when I was drinking, like all those things. I mean, it was pretty scary.
I remember watching your struggle with that. And I was broken for you. As you were being honest with it. And I think I remember at one point you expressing pieces of that and me just saying, well, that's honest, Steve.
Yeah.
And that's all you need to do is be honest with where you're at right now.
Yeah. Just being able to sit in that was, because I mean, you could really get into you could really beat yourself up and, and really spiral down. But I just remember, thinking like, okay, so I claim to be this man of faith, but am I really a man of faith? Like now that it's happened to me and my family, like, am I going to have the faith to stand and believe that, Kim's going to miraculously be healed? Because it's honestly, literally going to take some kind of a miracle,
right?
Regardless of, whether we want to acknowledge all the crazy people that we call them, but crazy people came up and prayed for her on several times a day.
Yeah.
And like I say that, use that as a term of endearment because we loved
Totally.
having them there. Literally, I credit our miracle to we opened up, we had a Facebook page for family and friends because people were driving us crazy, with phone calls and texts and how's she doing? We said, well, so Mariah started a praying for Kimmy page. And anyway, we decided that at that moment after we got that report, well, I'll back up just a minute. So Kelly called me just to check in and see how things were going. And I said, she's about the same. And I didn't want to go into the whole thing over the phone. And she goes, well, how's Kim doing? She asked how Kim is doing. I said, she's doing fine. And then she says, well, did the doctor make his rounds? Have you talked to the doctor? I said, oh yeah, I talked to the doctor. I'm like, she goes, well, what did he say? And I said, well, why don't you guys, I'll wait till you guys get here and then we'll just talk about it when you get here. And she's like, okay, well, you can't tell us right now. I'm like, well, I just prefer to tell you, when you get here. Well, Mariah, you can't tell that to Mariah. She's like, no, Dad, I want to know right now. What did the doctor say? You tell me right now. And I'm like, well, and so I told him, and first things out of Kelly's mouth as well. That's not the report that we're going to believe. So anyway, we opened it.
Both on the same page.
Yeah. We decided to open this up to friends of friends. And we asked specifically that it would be people that would pray specifically for Kimberly to, be healed from miraculous healing. So within days, it was over 4,000 people from all over the world.
I saw that.
Yep.
And I remember one morning we came in because we were staying down at I call it the Motel 4. The housing that was very convenient and such a blessing, and we were so glad that we got it. But it was
looking for the beauty inside of that tragedy.
Looking for the beauty.
The
inside
location was the only beauty.
Location. So we came in one morning, and as every morning, we went over to her good side, and we said, "Well, good morning." And up to that point, she hadn't really shown any signs of any kind of activity at all. She was kind of moving around, but that was it.
They would be like, no, that's a reflex. She's just having reflexes.
So this one morning, about 8:00, we got in, or maybe 7:30, got in there and good morning, beautiful. Mom and Dad are here. And I'll never forget this. This was literally one of the best days of my life. Kimmy blinked her eyes. She opened them and kind of blinked them. And she turned and made eye contact with me.
Ugh.
And she smiled. And Kelly and I were like, Mom. Kelly and I were screaming like, and they came running in. What? Nurse Cratchit came running in. She goes, what? Everything okay? And she just smiled at us. And she was like, oh, I haven't seen anything that would indicate she has that capability.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Suck it, Nurse Cratchit.
I'm like, I know what I know. I know that I know my daughter. I know that she acknowledged me. And I mean, from that moment on, like I had all kinds of doubt, but at that moment on, I'm like, she's in there. She's rallying. This is Kim. This is what she does. She's going to rally back. This like she always does. This is just her. She always gets knocked down. She picks herself back up and she rallies back. She's the most resilient person I've ever met in my life. I can't even begin to tell you how much respect I have for her because like, I don't have that. And I don't know anybody else that has that. I don't know anybody else that could do what she does.
Wow.
And it's just amazing. And so, from then on, then she began to start to improve and we decided that there's just a lot of miraculous things that took place, but we decided to move her as soon as she was able to be transported by air ambulance down to LA to an amazing hospital down there, USC. And so we got her down there and she was down there 3 or 4 weeks. And then she had improved so much. Well, we got down there and the neurologist, neurosurgeon down there says, I'm looking at the films from Reading, and he goes, I'm looking at her activity. She was starting to mouth words, like starting to mouth, I love you, and thank you to the nurses.
Wow.
And, and this is a girl who isn't supposed to come out of a coma.
Totally.
And he says, I'm looking at these films, and he goes, her activity does not match this. He goes, if I didn't know any better, I'd think they sent the wrong patient films.
Wow.
And he goes, so I want to do another MRI.
Wow.
And we're like, yeah, by all means. So he did another MRI. Well, it was a Saturday, and we hadn't heard from him yet. And so we asked the charge nurse, hey, has the doctor got the MRI back? And she goes, I'm not sure. Let me see if I can get a hold of him. So he calls us, and he's at a conference in San Francisco, a neurologist conference. And he says, so are you guys sitting down? And we said, no, but we can be. And he goes, well, I think you should. So Kelly's on the phone. She never sat down.
Man.
She cheated.
She never sat down.
And
she's a rebel.
She's on the hospital phone. And he goes, well, I got the film back. And he goes, I've showed it to several of my doctor. I'm up here at a conference. I've showed it to several of my doctor friends. And he goes, I got to tell you that none of us in our whole collective years of medical experience, we've never seen anything quite like this. He goes, all that damage that we saw in the first film, all the dead brain cells don't come back to life. They're dead. He goes, it's all gone.
Wow.
Literally all gone.
Wow.
And Kelly goes, well, do you have any kind of an explanation?
Do you want to say the M word?
He goes, a medical one? No. And he left it at that. But it was miraculous. And
Wow.
this was a 10-day period from
That's
the
insane.
8th of October to the 18th of October.
Whew.
And the only thing that changed was we had 4,000 people praying for him.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It was amazing. Something I thought was really beautiful is you guys would literally read prayers from the Facebook page over her.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have people send, like, you guys were you were fighting for her in a way that was really extraordinary, I thought.
One thing,
do you want to pop in, Kelly?
Yes.
Oh,
I
good.
just
Hold
wanna
on.
say something. I had never experienced the community of the Lord the way that we experienced this, and all of the giftings like prophetic art. I really never understood prophetic art before this. Well, we would have one of Kim's friends paint a picture, bring it up to the room that night, and it was just a very simple picture. And then the next morning at 4 a.m., or when she said she was super impressed that it had to be up to her room that night, and then the next morning at 4 a.m., there would be a song that someone would post on her Facebook page, and it was the interpretation for the painting that just had arrived, and we were
Wow.
supposed to play the song over her, that the Lord had instructed us to play this song over her, and her very own songs that she had written
Wow.
were also very prophetic
Mm-hmm.
for her, and so we'd play her own songs
Wow.
over her, and we would just see the just miraculous army of God. In fact, I had a vision one night as I was praying that that Steve and I were lugging this humongous big duffel bag, and it was so long and so wide, and we couldn't drag it, we couldn't pull it, we couldn't push it. And then all of a sudden, from both sides of us were this people for as long as I could see, and it was this huge army of people, and they lined up on either side of us, and they lifted that duffel bag up over our heads, and we all marched in unison, side by side, and that scripture that bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ, that was also on that same day posted on her Facebook page. And it was just like God was just so ever present, and the Holy Spirit just like we say we disassociated. Well, how I experienced that was like God, it felt like a big cushy comforter blanket or a big bubble just came and just surrounded us. And I felt so protected and numb, I guess, but protected at the same time from everything that was going on around us, and the feeling of being so heartbroken, but at the same time so comforted.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that was so interesting. I remember having a pastor up there, and I was like, I don't have any faith today. And he was like, oh, Mariah, you don't have to have any faith. Like, that God doesn't need you to have faith. Like, we're here to have faith for you. Like, if you read the Psalms, David, were so many times he didn't have any faith because he was in pain.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, I can let go of that thing that I've always believed that, oh, my parents need me to step up so that everything can be okay. Yeah. Like, I took that to God too, and felt like God needed me to play that role, and he didn't need that. Right. And he surrounded us with people that were willing to step up and that weren't living through the giant trauma that we were. And it was such a bizarre time of getting to experience the humanity of God. I had this one moment where I guess kind of to rewind to, because I stepped right back into my role of being the big girl.
Absolutely.
And so, the first
I'm
week,
going to take these over.
My parents were like, what is happening? This is so crazy. They couldn't remember anything the doctors or nurses were saying. So I'm like, I can remember. So I'd have to debrief with them. Here's what they're saying. Here's what I think that we should do. I've done the research on this.
Which I would just like to, for everyone listening, what Mariah is describing is a trauma response.
Yes.
It's one that looks good, but it is as much a trauma. So her parents would go into freeze or flight, and she would go into... I would call it a form of fight, which is logic. People don't recognize that logic, lawyering, the ability to get super clear on details and figure out a plan and a pathway forward. I recognize it because that is my trauma response. So I remember being like, oh, this is, and it's just helpful to point out for people who are listening who don't know to recognize that shows you're in as much trauma as them. And it's so easy to judge people's trauma responses as good or bad, but actually all of them have pros and cons.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I went right back into like, it's not safe to cry in front of my parents. Like, I really wanted comfort. I think I went over to your house and you like rubbed my head, and I even felt like, oh, I can't even cry in front of Abby. And I was like, oh, I'm in one, and I don't know how to get out of it, and I probably won't get out of it right now. So like, also just knowing I'm not going to get out of it, and that's probably going to be okay, and I'll figure it out on the other side of this. But there was a few moments that I did feel safe with the Lord, and I would take myself out of the room and go, there was these little like tiny little prayer rooms you could be in. And so I remember like closing the door so no other people would come in. And I remember one day I was just like crying out, like I just lost it. And I was like, my heart is so broken. I don't know that I'll ever come back from this. Because it was excruciating seeing my sister like that. And it was almost more excruciating knowing that a human did that to her.
Totally.
I kept pretending. Whenever I'd get to that point, I would just pretend like she got into a car accident.
It's much easier.
Because then it was like nobody's fault. Like
the
I just
intention of feeling like somebody purposefully did this.
It was unbearable to know that, like imagining somebody getting her to that place, hurting her so bad that she might be a vegetable. It was unbearable. And I was like crying out to God, like, this is the most heartbreaking. My heart feels so broken, and I don't know that I'll ever not feel broken. Yeah. And I remember the Lord just being like God the Father was like, I know that feeling, because I watched my son go through that, and he didn't deserve that. He was just there to help everyone, and he was there to save, and Kim was there to help, and she was there to save. And I know how painful it was to watch him get beat. I know this pain. And I was like, oh, I didn't know you knew this depth of pain, but you do. You know what it looks like to walk through this. And I felt so comforted by that. And like God with us, like he was just with me in that. And he was okay that I was stuck in a trauma response and he knew like exactly how to meet me in that. And I don't know, like that's one of the things that I think is beautiful in the midst of trauma is you get to experience a part of God that sometimes it's hard to access because you don't let yourself sink into the depths of it's very rare that I'm going to be like, my heart is broken.
Yeah.
But it was just, that felt so stunning to see God meet me there.
Yeah.
And know that he knows that pain. He's not God in heaven sitting on a throne totally devoid of knowing our human experience.
And I just remember sitting there, and after the doctor left and just kind of stunned. And I remember thinking one of the first things that came to mind was Matthew 6:15, that I mean, we're desperate at this point. We have no other option but a miracle. Mm-hmm. That's all we have. I mean, I don't know what else to do. The medical community is saying this is probably all we're going to get. And yet that's not acceptable. And I just remember thinking, I have to pray for her to be healed. And Matthew, 6:15, that we're called to forgive. Like we have to forgive. And this became a real important piece because I didn't want to forgive. Like I wasn't really angry. Like I didn't want to go kill the kid. I don't know that I ever really felt that ever. But when I did that, when I prayed and I said, Lord, I don't know how I can forgive this young man for what he did to my daughter. Look at her. How could I do that? And then that thing came back. But, my son hung on a cross. And I'm like, yeah, that was far worse. And he did that so that I would have the ability to do this. And so I just did it. It was just an act of faith. It was an act of obedience. It was nothing more than that. There was no heart in it.
No emotion.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Like I was just like, all right, I forgive him. And in that moment, I'll never forget it. In that moment, I'll never forget. I had an image of this kid. I didn't know what he looked like. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know his race. I didn't know what he looked like. I mean, I knew nothing about him, but I had this image of a little 3 or 4-year-old boy in a system, because this kid had been in a system,
Foster care.
a whole system, whole life, a ward of the state. And I just had this image of this little boy being abused and being beaten and being, terribly treated, and never having anybody there for him, not having any parents there to hold him and to love him, crying himself asleep at night. And my heart just began to break for this kid. Like, of all the weird things, that my heart began to break for this kid that just did this horrific thing to my daughter. And I don't know, I just began to have some compassion for him. And honestly, I believe that's what kept me from going crazy as a father.
Yeah.
Because I could have let my mind go a completely different direction. And then beginning to look for the beauty in tragedy, like you talked about. Abby, when we first adopted her, my father-in-law, he's a great guy, decided that it would be a good idea to videotape Mariah being born. Did it very tastefully. Want to clarify that. But we had this videotape of Mariah's birth. And Kimmy, when we first got her, I don't remember how that even came about, I think she was asking a lot of questions. And so Kelly decided to show her this video where Mariah came from.
Yeah.
And so everything's a side shot and everything, but it is pretty cool. It's a pretty miraculous thing. But I remember she was obsessed with that. She wanted to watch it every day.
Oh.
Because I think she felt like, Mariah came out of mom, but she came out of an airplane or something,
Right.
But she just, it's like she wanted that experience.
Totally.
And so what happened in this process is we got to see Kimberly open her eyes for the first time. We got to see her hear her talk for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
We got to see her
giggle.
Her first giggle was so cute. It just melted our hearts.
Her yawns were like when a baby yawns. It was like the most precious.
Yeah. And we watched her walk for the first time and climb stairs for the first time. Well, we had all these things that we never got with her.
Ugh.
We got them. We got to have them with her. And I'm telling you, it changed everything. Like
it bonded.
Oh.
I remember seeing there being a bonding that was happening that had been missed.
Yes.
That you hadn't gotten to do that bonding steps with her.
And oddly, it translated to the other kids. I can't explain it.
Really?
But it translated. I began seeing them in a different light. I began experiencing them in a different way. And my love just grew for everybody. Like, it was just, and maybe that was stuff that was happening in me. My heart was opening and I was beginning to be vulnerable and be able to love again and love myself through all this. And yeah, it was crazy. But I do remember, so I have not as many as I used to have, but I got a few cars, and I had a mechanic that was kind of on staff, and he would come and pick up cars from my garage and bring them back, and kind of a thug, lived down in this area, gangbanger. And he found out about it, and he knew Kim really well. He'd worked on her cars. Yeah. And I remember one time he was like, hey, this is pretty early on. He goes, hey, I've got some connections. Like, where's this kid at? And I go, he's down in the county jail. And he goes, well, I've got some connections. I can get somebody in there and take care of this for you right away.
Oh,
wow.
And like, for a moment.
That's a hard choice.
Yeah.
For a moment.
Yeah. That's real.
Like, just for a moment, I was like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
That's real.
And I said,
you're a better person than me. It would have taken me a couple days.
I said, dude, this is so tempting. And I even asked a few questions. Well, what would that look like?
That's real. That's real.
Totally.
1000%.
What would that look like? Like, could we not go all the way? Could we just make it bad?
Could you do it like as bad as it was for her?
Yeah.
That bad.
Yeah. And honestly, I mean, it was like, and I was like, oh, thanks, man. But I really appreciate it. But he was mad. I mean, he was just livid.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody, and it was really tempting a lot of times because people would get really, like, I found myself like comforting other people.
Right.
They'd be just livid about it, like, oh, mad. And don't you want to just kill the kid? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't actually.
Which is a miracle.
And then it was funny because I would tell them, I say, but what did that kid's life look like at 3 or 4 or 5? Like, can you imagine? And you just to see the look on their face go from anger to like, oh, I never really thought about that because I didn't really think about it.
Well, I
Yeah.
think we have the experience of having I have 3 adopted siblings that I've seen how intense their behavioral issues have been, and what if they would have just stayed in the system.
Exactly.
Right.
And my husband and I were in the very early process of being foster parents, which we didn't go through with, but the statistics for kids in the foster care system are like 80% or more will either end up homeless, trafficked, or in prison.
Yep.
Wow.
So it was
Yep.
and older boys, they're so unwanted. They're so unwanted. There's no pretty way to say nobody wants older boys. And so we kept thinking about that. And that was when I heard who it was and I found out he's 17 or was 17 when it happened, I was like, does he have any family? And the detective was like, no, he's got nobody. And I hated him, but I also thought, you've just done the most horrific thing you've probably ever done in your life, and you're all by yourself. And you're going to have some moments where you regret it and you feel like a worthless piece of trash. And I wish you had love in that moment. I wish that you got comfort there. And knowing that he wasn't going to get that allowed us to maintain some compassion for him and some understanding that he's really a victim too. He's a victim that chose to act on his pain. But at one point, there was a really helpless little kid that didn't deserve what he got.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, I'm going to kind of sideswipe things here because I know where this story is going, and it is beautiful and powerful and impactful, and I don't want to skimp on any of
I don't
those
want to rush
details.
this.
I don't want to rush it. So we're just going to make this a 3-part series instead of a 2-part, which means that we get Mariah and Steve back again, which I'm so excited about. This episode's been so good. It's so hopeful to remember. It's something that I say about God all the time is when the more I've learned about trauma, and I have learned a lot about trauma in the last few years, specifically PTSD, something that is so important is that being able to get regulated, your nervous system being able to get regulated again. And that normally happens through the safety of being with someone that's attuned to you and safe, and where you can let down your guard and you know you'll be okay and you know you'll be loved. And for me, this is the most beautiful thing about the way I view God, is that he is Emmanuel, that is God with us. Knowing that we are humans on a planet where there's trauma and there's going to be trauma, the fact that there is a comforting presence that where we don't have to walk out the depths of this life experience alone is such a huge gift. And I feel so thankful for that. So thank you guys for sharing that part of your story today.
Yeah, big thank you for getting into that and being brave and sharing some of those details. We're really looking forward to next week's episode. This is obviously something you don't want to miss. You're left on a cliffhanger.
We're going towards the climax.
What happened? How did this go? Well, you'll find out next week, and we'll see you next week.
Oh, wait, really quick. This is the time for people to sign up for Living Fully Alive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mariah, Steve, this is your chance.
Oh, point to me.
They're like, we already said it.
Well, I can certainly tell you that had I not gone through the processes that I've gone through with Justin and Abby and their programs, my response would have been radically different than it was. And perhaps I may have taken up that mechanic on his offer. So if you don't want to kill somebody, take the class.
That is maybe the best Living Fully Alive spiel I've ever heard.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. You can sign up at justinandabby.com. And I'm so proud of you guys. You guys are amazing. The resiliency, I know you talked about with Kim, her resiliency, but I would say that about every single person in your family. Your resiliency, your Steve, Mariah, and I'm like, the audience can't see who I'm pointing towards. Kelly, just watching you guys have your hearts expanded and become more of who you're meant to be through tragedy. Tragedy either hardens us or it softens us. sometimes it does both. I'd say it does both often. But you watch people who deliberately and intentional choose the pathway of transformation. You see them become the best versions of themselves through the most excruciating circumstances. And all of you have done that. And I just feel so beyond proud to know you, to have witnessed your transformation through this, and the amount of beauty that's come from your heart. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Abby.
Bye, guys.